A nation doesn't become a superpower suddenly. It costs money, sweat, blood, love, and the lives of many generations. It needs united efforts of the citizens of the country. Good morning, one and all. REVA Business School was established with a long term vision to educate and empower the next generation of managers and leaders to build sustainable businesses which will not only enable them to achieve operational excellence but also explore new business models. With a highly trained faculty and an able management, REVA Business School provides its students a great learning environment that fosters intellectual, social, and ethical development and thus enables them to pursue successful and fulfilling careers. Our practice of conducting distinguished lecture series helps students develop holistically. And today, we are going to witness one such lecture, Actualizing the Global Potential of India. A country's political importance or its status in the world is determined by its geographical location, size, and resources, both human and material. The organizational and managerial skills we possess, as well as harnessing of technology in resource utilization, shape a country's capabilities in world affairs. Of equal importance are a country's foreign and domestic policies that reflect the role the country plays on world stage. India's geopolitical importance in the world may therefore be viewed within these parameters. To enlighten us more, we have with us an outstanding personality. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Professor Madhav Das Nalapat. We welcome you, sir. I extend my welcome to our Honorable Chancellor, Dr. P. Shamaraju, who has been a continued pillar of strength to our school. We welcome you, sir. Last but not the least, I welcome all the faculty members, staff, and the students.
Our today's chief guest, Professor Madhav Das Nalapat, is India's first professor of geopolitics and the UNESCO Peace Chair at Manipal University, where he is vice chair of Manipal Advanced Research Group and director of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. A journalist and a former editor of Times of India and of Mathrubhumi, he is currently the editorial director of ITV Network and the Sunday Guardian India. Since 2020, he is a member of the executive committee of the Editors Guild of India. He began his academic career as a fellow of Center for Political Research in 1974. 4 years later, he moved to business management, taking over as the executive director of the Mathrubhumi Printing and Publishing Company Limited, where he implemented Thiruvananthapuram edition project in the record time of 27 months. The Malayalam word Mathrubhumi translates to motherland in English. In 1998, Professor Nalapat switched from media to academia at Manipal University, where Ramdas Pai was chancellor, later establishing the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, where he still teaches. He is also a distinguished fellow of the University of Georgia, USA. He has written 7 books, the latest in 2014 being The Practice of Geopolitics, which contains his writings over the years on various important themes of international relations. Professor Nalapat has worked exhaustively for the betterment of India-United States relations, recognizing the importance of robust partnership between the United States and India in matters of global strategy and security. Professor Nalapat was the first to define the Indo-Pacific as stretching from the Horn of Africa to Vladivostok, Alaska, and Chile. In 2003, he pitched a concept in Washington for an Asian NATO that has since evolved in the Quadrilateral Alliance. In 2020, he introduced his concept of the Indo-Pacific Charter to protect democracy and preserve peace in the Indo-Pacific region. He has helped foster India-Taiwan ties in 1992. Professor Nalapat persuaded P.V. Narasimha Rao to set up representative offices in Delhi and Taipei. Also, in 1992, Professor Nalapat argued for full recognition of Israel. In 2003, with JINSA, he organized the first ever India-Israel-US trilateral in New Delhi. Professor Nalapat has advisory roles with former PM Rajiv Gandhi and PM PV Narasimha Rao. In 1999, Professor Nalapat was appointed UNESCO Peace Chair at Manipal University for Higher Education to promote integrated system of research, training, information, and documentation activities in the field of peace, human rights, democracy, tolerance, non-violence, and international understanding. This is just a brief of an illustrious career of Professor Madhav Das Nalapat. Now, to felicitate a guest, I request Honorable Chancellor Sir and a Dean Ma'am, Dr. Shubha A., to accompany the guest on stage. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Now, I would like to hand over the session to you, sir. Over to you.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Chancellor. I'd like to thank Dr. Raghavendra Shetty and for having invited me here. And I'd like to say that soon after I entered your campus, I had the feeling of being in a very different kind of an atmosphere than one normally encounters in several parts of the world, including in India. And the atmosphere here was one of confidence. And I think that is so very important. I was talking to the Chancellor that, you know, we keep trying to say that we're looking for extraordinary people. The fact is that in every individual, there is something extraordinary. And the point about leadership is to identify that extraordinary quality in an individual and to actualize that quality, operationalize that quality, because you may have the most, extraordinary of qualities inside you. And as I said, all of us are, in a sense, ordinary people. All of us are, in a sense, extraordinary people. We are a horizontal world. We're not a vertical world in which some are superior people, some are not. We're a world in which everybody has certain qualities, and those qualities are, in a sense, comparable in essence to others. But having said that, the point is of leadership is to recognize those qualities and to make those qualities what we say, what is said in Hindi, prakat, express those qualities, develop those qualities, and finally utilize those qualities. I think, quite frankly, the example that has been set here by the founder of the university, and if I may say so, the founder of the university, I always believe that concepts are founded in the brain. They're not founded in brick and mortar. They're not founded in colleagues and other humans. It's founded in the mind. And there was a very noble mind that founded this university, and I'm happy to see that the Chancellor has actualized that vision of that particular mind, and as a consequence of which, I'm very sure that through this university, you are going to be able to, as a university, actualize many more minds, and who in turn will actualize many more minds and create that chain reaction that is needed for a country to develop. Now, I mean, there are. I'd just like to say that I was listening to a somewhat long introduction. These days, in the age of the internet, frankly, and when a lot of what you say and what you write is online, I think the best introduction is of any individual is basically made in advance of the individual actually coming and appearing in front of you. But having said that, I'd like to say that back in the 90s, back in the early 90s, when I used to write in the Times of India, and when I used to talk about India emerging as one of the great powers of the world, there was a lot of, I would say polite, sometimes amused laughter at the very concept of India emerging as one of the top powers of the world. And you can't blame them for that kind of thing. Today, when we talk in terms of India being the third superpower after the United States and China, that we are on an emergent path. And I'd only like to say that being on an emergent path is basically a work in progress. If you are a work in progress, as everybody here can testify, you've had a situation where this is a work in progress, but that work in progress gets interrupted or may even get reversed. It's not yet happened, but it can happen. So in that situation, there is a mood of confidence in the country, a mood that perhaps we are not, in a sense, talking about us not being ordinary and being ordinary, but the reality is the perception that as a people, there is something extraordinary about us. I think more and more people among our 1.4 billion people accept that. The problem that we've had in India is that we essentially set very low targets for ourselves, even lower targets for the country. There is no real ambition. There is the pride or the professed pride in being somebody. It's like, for example, the pride in being from a particular family. You may have a very illustrious and distinguished family. You are justifiably proud of being in that family. But that's not enough. The question is, what are you going to do to ensure that you make your mark upon the world? However illustrious the family you may come from, the important fact is, what is going to be your contribution? And if you rest on the contribution made in the past and say, all right, this has happened, that's enough, I don't need to do anything. Frankly, I'm not very sure that you could consider yourself illustrious simply because of that particular heritage. So in the same way again, all of us have seen the example of individuals. I've seen the example, for example, in the late 90s, I've met scientists in Hyderabad, in Chennai, two locations where you have an enormous amount of talent that has been springing up. And they were active in India. They were trying to promote the discoveries that they had. And they found that the ambience, the surrounding ambience, was not in their favor. In India, for a long time, unfortunately, it has been very easy to basically destroy a good idea at birth or soon after birth, or even before the birth. Essentially, how to destroy it? Essentially by all kinds of legal obstacles that one can create, and you have a situation in which public interest litigation can come on almost anything. It's been very interesting to me studying these things and researching these things, how whenever there's a discovery of something like uranium or lithium or some kind of a rare earth situation, you always find some PIL getting filed. You always find some front page newspaper item getting filed. And you always find some character assassination taking place of the individuals who are the prime movers behind this. I think I'm thankful to Providence that our Chancellor has obviously could not, that kind of a problem did not come to the Chancellor. when he began his career, and also when he basically undertook to fulfill the dream of the founder and build this exceptionally fine university. But you have an ecosystem in which it is absurdly easy to stop something from happening and extremely difficult to get something to happen. Largely because of the first factor, that it's so easy to stop something from happening. And if you analyze the law, I mean, the wonderful thing about India is that after, I mean, I'm using the word wonderful in a slightly ironic sense. After 1947, we were supposed to be free. We are independent. And yes, we are an independent country. But if you look at the agencies of government and you look at the different types of officials who have the power of arrest, for example, and arrest is a very precious thing. It's the loss of liberty. Now, some of us were locked up, I mean, in my case, for a very brief period of time, very, relative to others, during the emergency. I mean, it is not, I mean, in my case, I can assure you, it was not the fault of Mrs. Indira Gandhi. It was not the fault of Mr. Sanjay Gandhi. They were completely unaware of it. Some policeman somewhere read something that I had written and thought that this guy is a menace to the country, or that somebody will be happy if he's put inside, and well, that happened. But fortunately, there was at that point in time, there was some Supreme Court thing, and a whole lot of us were released, and I was also released. And after that, for what reasons that have been made public at that time, fortunately, I did not go back. But it instilled in me a knowledge of the fact that this power of arrest is something that should be very sparingly made available to individuals. And if you have all manner of individuals in all manner of departments having this power of arrest, what you're doing is not preventing corruption. What you're doing is encouraging it, because the power of arrest, ensures the ability to take a much higher bribe from individuals, vulnerable individuals whom you target, than would otherwise be the case. So one of the first things that you need in a healthy ecosystem is to ensure that such draconian colonial era powers are reduced to as much as possible. I am heartened by the fact that a large number of those powers have been removed under Prime Minister Modi. A large number of completely absurd laws have been also removed. For example, I am told there was a law, I don't think it's there anymore, that if you buy more than, I would say, 2 bottles of alcohol, it's not just when you come in from a flight, even inside the country, you could technically be held in breach of the law. And if you look at the large numbers of penal codes and punishments all across the board, you will find that it's very difficult to go through a day of your life without infringing some code or the other, and technically making yourself vulnerable to arrest. Of course, that doesn't take account the possibility that some fake charge is put upon you. And my limited time inside that, as a guest of the state, where my food and not very good food, not very good lodging, but it was looked after, I was quite convinced that 90% of the people who had come in were innocent of any crime, except that they were in the wrong place and they annoyed the wrong people at the wrong time or whatever. And a lot of the people I met outside are people who should have been inside as per the laws, but have never been inside because for some odd reason, again, the point I'm trying to make is any objective, any law, any regulation is as useful as its implementation. And if you don't implement a regulation and a law correctly, let's say because of the individual who's doing that implementation, that individual possibly is looking after taking care of the expenses of his family and others for the next 4 or 5 generations. And I've always been very interested to see when I go to the United States, for example, or go to Britain, how many children of officers of the Pakistan military are studying in these institutions. Now, the fees are very, very high, I can assure you, in these institutions when you compare in terms of Indian rupees and Pakistan rupees. But many of them are studying there. And again, it's been a source of mystery to me as to how that money was afforded. If you study in the United States, you will find that there is a particular form that you have to fill. And in that form, you have to list the sources of income that will enable you to pay the fees in the institution in which you're studying. I've tried for a very long time to ensure that the government of India get access to that same information, so that the government of India can get access to the information as to how somebody is studying abroad and on what basis those funds are being basically, generated. But so far, that kind of curiosity has never really happened to the government of India. The last time I seriously took this up was in 2014 with the current National Security Advisor, Mr. Ajit Doval. I said, Ajit, why don't you do this? The Americans know, how the guardians of these kids are funding their education. Shouldn't we also know? Mr. Doval said it's a great idea, but as far as I know, so far it hasn't happened. Anyway, that's a different point. The point I'm trying to make is that sometimes less is more. Sometimes smaller is better. And which is why we were very enthused when you had at that time, Chief Minister Narendra Modi say that minimum government, maximum governance. Because quite frankly, the idea of governance is not governance entirely by government. The idea of government is to empower the citizens of this country. And here again, of course, I'm delighted to say the Prime Minister made a very welcome start by giving this self-attestation. Otherwise, you had to run to a gazetted officer. And in some cases, gazetted officers, there was an expense involved in that signature. So you had to undergo that expense. And if that expense was taken care of, it didn't really matter what was being affirmed. It was affirmed. I mean, it's far better to trust your own people. I have not seen, frankly, the difference in patriotism between the civil service and civil society. Now, if you have a perception that only civil servants are loyal to the country, only civil servants or civil servants cannot be loyal, only civil society can be loyal to the country, others cannot be loyal to the country, I don't think that's true. As a part of civil society, I'd like to say that civil servants are also loyal to the country. And I'd like to say the overwhelming majority of civil servants have given their lives in service, have done great things for the country, as have individuals forming the majority of civil society. So this civil service, civil military classification, which essentially is a relic of the colonial era, because you had a civil service that was run from outside the country. You had a civil society that was based in the country. Unfortunately, it continued for very, very long. Again, changes are being made now. For example, in the field of defense, some of us have been talking this for about 30 years, finally happening that you've got private-public partnerships really taking place in defense. You've got school kids in Chennai able to use ISRO facilities for sending, satellites into space. And why am I not surprised at a school kid being able to put a satellite into space? Because you go abroad. The very individuals I saw, and there are individuals, I can talk about, the individuals who are terribly frustrated in India. I'm talking again about the 90s, I'm talking about the early 21st century. Some of them were contemplating, abandoning their research activity, their innovation altogether. Some of them were even thinking of the ultimate problem, which is essentially removing yourself from this world. That was the frustration of trying to promote an idea on soil where you drop the idea, it immediately dies. When they used to go abroad, and when I went abroad, I saw them flourishing. So I said, why is it that the chap who's almost on the verge of suicide in India is flourishing outside? How is it that this chap has now become a very successful innovator, a very successful entrepreneur, whereas he couldn't do it in India? Well, the point is exactly the point about that was earlier mentioned, a point that's illustrated, for example, by the Chancellor's attitude, in which he looks for the good in people, develops that good, utilizes that good, and operationalizes it for the sake of improving quality. That is the task, frankly. You guys are people in business management. In my university, we have a pretty good business management school, I think. I know I can't obviously say anything about my own university because I am slightly biased, but we have a reasonably good school. But that, I think, is the essence of management. You know, and the essence of management is to discover the good, the genius in everybody, and to work out what kind of an ambience needs to be created. It's like planting a seed, the most precious seed. Unless you plant it right, unless the soil is right, and the soil becomes right when you tend the soil properly, and you're seeing this on this campus with so many new trees. I was delighted to see a lot of greenery on this campus. I had my initial university in Mumbai, and in Mumbai, one of the great inventions in Mumbai was the concrete tree. You had huge circular orbs of concrete, and trees were painted there. And they were put on concrete poles on the road. Personally, I wasn't very happy looking at those concrete trees. I don't think those concrete trees gave me any satisfaction. I really don't think they contributed to the environment. All they did was cost a bit of steel and cement that could have possibly been used in housing. But anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that there is an ecosystem for growth. There is an ecosystem for development. And if that ecosystem exists, that ecosystem has always existed in India. We had what Raj Krishna called the Hindu rate of growth. I would, not call it I would call it the Indian rate of growth because I wouldn't like to tag rate of growth with any particular faith. I think we very promiscuously use religious tags in too many locations. And I've always said this, and I'm saying this again to you. For those of you who have seen some of my YouTube things, probably it won't be new. You can't call yourself anything other than an Indian nationalist. You cannot have a religious tag to nationalism. If you're an Indian nationalist, India is precious to you. Whether you're a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian or a Buddhist or a Jain or a Sikh, it doesn't matter, or an atheist. It doesn't matter. You are a nationalist, period. You're an Indian nationalist. So either you're an Indian nationalist or you're not a nationalist at all. But having said that, I'd like to say that I must, say that a lot of we had a period in the early 50s where we could have really taken off a high growth trajectory. It might surprise you to know that during the Second World War, when the Japanese were being fought by the Allies in China, Burma, other parts of the world, a large part of the manufacturing and defense equipment came from, guess where? India. The British were forced to make India a manufacturing hub. They didn't want to do it, they didn't like to do it, but they did it. It became a manufacturing hub, with the result that in 1945, when Japan was destroyed, there was nothing. South Korea, frankly, was basically a whole lot of agricultural fields at that point in time. The South Korean people are amazing. They come from a very long history, and they trace their DNA also back to India, because they say an Indian princess and a huge retinue of the princess's retinue came to Korea, Joseon, and married into the royal house of Korea. And therefore, there's a special warmth in the Korean people for Indian tradition and Indian culture. Now, at that point in time, some of our companies were the biggest in Asia, partly because the others had been knocked down, but also because they were doing exceptionally well with war and other things. Of course, then you had the Vietnam War. And I think the Vietnam War was one of the factors behind the growth of Taiwan, South Korea, to a large extent Japan. All this, why? Because the Americans under Lyndon Johnson had a very smart policy of sourcing as much of their equipment as possible from lower cost economical sources nearby. George W. Bush and Cheney were frankly not very smart. When they did the Iraq war, they tried to source as much of it as possible from inside the United States. As a consequence, the cost of the war went up through the roof. And you are seeing the United States is surviving today because the dollar is still regarded as a currency where you keep money, where you just block money. The day that function is removed, and the day you have a reset of the dollar, which China and Russia, for example, have been working on for some time, you're going to have a serious problem. But again, the reality is that at that point in time, there was a conclusion reached that the private sector was ipso facto not dependable, not reliable. It did not really have the tricolor to heart. So you had this, the public sector will take the commanding heights of the economy. I'm not the private sector, unless you had, if I may say so, excellent contacts in the political establishment, they somehow managed to survive. I know that Manipal, Dr. T.M.A. Pai, and after him, Ramdas, it took a lot of effort, frankly, to get through all the various problems that were created for an independent university at that point in time. And in large part, I'd like to say the Indian judiciary stepped in and helped significantly. And as a consequence, Manipal was allowed to continue. And I think that's certainly not been anything other than a good thing, just as the development of this university is nothing other than a good thing. Having said that, I'd like to say, I'm not going to take longer than my allocated time, I can promise you that. This golden opportunity we lost in the 1950s. Today, we have a new golden opportunity. I may say so, a platinum opportunity. And that is what, in my case, I've been calling for quite some time, and which is now increasingly coming to Cold War 2.0. Cold War 1.0 was between the United States and China mainly, and the USSR, definitely not China. China supported the United States during Cold War 1.0. China was one of the key factors which helped the United States against the USSR. I hope the Russians don't forget that these days. And as a consequence, you had this extraordinary rise of China. In the 1980s, up to the 1990s and beyond, extraordinary rise of China. The Chinese were enabled to grow by precisely the countries that they are now threatening the most. The United States, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea. These are the countries that helped Taiwan to grow immensely. The Japanese gave huge amounts of aid, huge investments. The Americans, all kinds of scientific knowledge was given to them at a time when they were denying us our knowledge because they felt that we should cut off our nuclear weapons, etc. And I compared that to the thumb of Ekalavya, that India cuts off its nuclear thing. It's like Ekalavya cutting off his thumb. Ekalavya made that mistake. We are not going to make that mistake. That was back in the 90s, an op-ed of mine in the Times of India. But having said that, I'd like to say that Some of us have been pointing to the dissonance between, in the world of technology, in the world of artificial intelligence, in the world of hybrid warfare, warfare in which for several years there have been an attempt to create through discourses, online discourses, a widening of fault lines in society in which the fringes, the extreme fringes become more powerful and the moderate middle becomes weaker. So you have situations in which different facets of society act confrontationally towards each other. And one of the problems in the internet is each of us is now burrowing deeper and deeper into our own wellspring of prejudice. So you have a whole battery of internet sites that reflect your own prejudices. You don't want to go into any other site. So you look at those sites more and more, and your prejudices get reinforced. The guy who's got the opposite prejudice, same thing happens to him or her. And again, they get reinforced. And these gaps start widening. The moderate middle starts getting squeezed, and social tensions start developing. That is something that is very dangerous for any country and for a democracy. And some of us have, I've got a fairly good help from researchers, and the researchers showed there is an organized effort to ensure that hate speech, hate groups, widening of societal, if I may say so, divergences is taking place on an industrial scale through the use of the internet. We may not, those of us who are involved in this may not even realize whose game we are playing. We may not even realize that this is against the interests of our country. You may believe it is exactly in the interest of your country. But the fact is that a country does well when the moderate middle is overwhelmingly powerful. A country does well when the extreme fringes, the fringe of the fringe is the hate groups, becomes very weak. It does not do well when those fringes start seeping into the mainstream at all. So the point is very simple. In this age of technology, in which, for example, some of you should study TikTok in the US and TikTok in China. There's a huge difference between the Chinese TikTok and the American TikTok. The effect on society of the American TikTok is vastly different from the effect in society, in Chinese society, of the Chinese TikTok. And it's, in my view, that's not a surprise. It's not, it's not something that one should be surprised. Given the CCP's approach to it's a hybrid war situation. A hybrid war means you use the internet, you use agriculture, you use health, and you use so many things besides the military in conducting a war. So ultimately, you suck out the resonance from a country so that you almost don't need to fight a war to get what you want. The ultimate war is to get what you want on the battlefield without a fight. And that is something that hybrid warfare promotes. Having said that, today it is an inevitability that decoupling, at least of technology, has got to take place from China to other parts of the world. That kind of thing has to take place for the protection of the democracies itself. Decoupling is not happening because managers feel it's better or it's more profitable. It's happening because it's now a security necessity. And security is now playing a much more important role in business decisions than played in the past. Because in today's world, if you infiltrate through security, you are infiltrating across the entire spectrum of activity. In that situation, our country is ideally poised to be the default beneficiary of a lot of that decoupling. But for that, we need a regulatory structure that is clean, that is friendly, that is objectively based towards promoting growth and promoting development and not stifling development of the kind that made an innovator in Andhra or an engineering genius in Tamil Nadu almost despair and find salvation for his ideas, for himself, abroad, in the United States, some other country. That's not the point. You need a different kind of thing. Under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a whole lot of important changes have come about in that. And that's possibly the reason why you have this tremendous, negative kind of dialogues taking place, which are completely, in my view, not unmerited. But they are taking place. It is there. It's something that we have to, understand, and we have to react to, not in a reactive way. For example, a BBC has a documentary. I watched both of these. I can tell you they were plain exercises in character assassination. I don't think any sensible person would take it seriously. But the BBC became a martyr by a ban. Unnecessarily, there was a ban, and the BBC became a martyr because of that. So personally, and that kind of a overreaction is sometimes has an effect quite different from what it should be having. But that's a different point. Freedom of expression, freedom of belief, freedom to think, freedom to act is important. And why? If you look at Britain, how did this tiny little country from the first Elizabeth I, it's like a bookend. The Elizabeth II, at that point, Britain had gone down completely. Elizabeth I marked the rise. It was because Elizabeth was a very lenient ruler. She was a Tudor. She had gone into a kind of Calvinist Protestantism. The Catholics were against her. A lot of people were against the Tudors. And therefore, she had to be very, if I may say so, willing to accept large numbers of people, not be too harsh on them. As a consequence, the individuals became empowered in England of that period, in Elizabethan England. They sailed across the world. She was what you call a one-window clearance, single window clearance. Clear, 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 clear. You're loyal to me? Clear. You're loyal to me? Clear. So you had Francis Drake going and plundering Spanish vessels. You had somebody later on going and landing on the American continent. You had all kinds of things happen. It didn't happen because of a grand plan by Elizabeth, a grand plan by some of her courtiers. It happened because individuals were empowered to each do his or her own thing. And, like the case of this university, it came up because individuals wanted to do something, and fortunately, especially since 2014, I must confess, a climate has been created in which it's much easier to do something than in the past. Although still, there are too many people, too many officials with the power of arrest, too many regulations. The Prime Minister is taking a hatchet to them, but I think, he needs to use that hatchet for at least a year or two more until the third term. But having said that, I'd like to say this is our opportunity. And I want to end by saying, how do you seize that opportunity? You seize that opportunity by defining not only what you are, but what you're not. And what you're not is not a country that is afraid of China. Personally, I would like to say that I think, across the years, I've seen a certain lack of, if I may say so, resolve, if I may say so, on the part of the civilian side in facing up to the Chinese situation. It's not the military, it's the civilian side. As a consequence, the military has been held back. For example, the loss of Tibet. The loss of Tibet has given China the ability to finally choke India of a lot of its water resources and send us into famine. We have that ability with Pakistan. We are not using it. The Chinese have that ability with us. Unlike us, they are in danger of using it. So the loss of the Tibetan plateau has been a very significant blow to us. But having said that, I'd like to say, I think it's very important for us to declare very clearly that, look, we are also on the side of democracy versus authoritarianism. And we are also very definitely countries that are opposing hegemony in the Indo-Pacific. We're not here and there. What is called the Panchatantra bat that pretended to be an animal among the animals and a bird among the birds. And finally, both the animals and the birds threw out the bat, and the poor bat could only come out at night because it was afraid to come out in the daytime, because it was neither regarded as an animal or a bat by its own logic. So the point is, it's important for us to understand the reality of Cold War 2.0. The Chinese were brilliant in Cold War 1.0. They made the best use of Cold War 1.0. They went ahead, and as a consequence, they were able to develop with the help of significant numbers of countries. We have to take a similar kind of, if I may say so, opportunistic view of Cold War 2.0. You know, avsarvad is seen as a negative word in India. For me, it's a beautiful word. It means taking advantage of opportunities. That's what an innovator does. That's what an entrepreneur does. In our country, we have this fetish of sacrifice. Now, and it's said that that's a traditional fetish. Actually, my wife, and I would advise you to look into her article, Lakshmi Bai. She's written a lot in the online version of Outlook, for example. Recently, her book, Maisha, came out. And by the way, my latest book came out a few months ago, last August. That was 75 years of Indian foreign policy. The next book in that series is by a chap called Subramaniam Jaishankar, who holds a job in the government of India. And the book after that is going to come out around July, which is going to be on Cold War 2.0, illusion of reality. The point is, it's a reality. Let's use Cold War 2.0 the way the Chinese use Cold War 1.0. Let's be opportunist. Let's not talk about self-sacrifice. Poor Jawaharlal Nehru sacrificed a lot of interests of India, whether it's a UNSC seat, whether it is Gwadar port, whether it's X, Y, or Z. Ranas wanted it, no. Because for the sake of friendship. And at the end in 1962, the country which even during the war, India was promoting as the UN Security Council permanent member, went against India. And guess which country supported us during that war? One country, and I applaud that country, I salute that country, Bhutan. The only country that supported us after all these years of promoting the interests of the whole world was Bhutan. I'm not saying that the world is not important. The world is important. But the world will be important if the world is prevented from hegemony. Our country stood against the hegemony of the United States as a superpower. We never had a single military drill with the Soviet Union. Not one. So we were not a military ally of the Soviet Union ever. We had to get their weapons because the Americans wouldn't supply us unless we handed over Kashmir, which was a no-go area. But the fact of the matter is, that in this period of this new Cold War, we have again a platinum opportunity. In the 1950s, that opportunity we lost with our obsession with the state, our obsession with believing that the state is superior. And good things happen with the state. No one is saying, for God's sake, end the state. The state, your HAL, those beautiful factories that have come up, HMT, wonderful, a very, very wonderful company. It came up, all these different things, BHEL. Along with that, the private sector as well. But the private sector was, in a sense, handicapped. And as a consequence, the Indian private sector, which were giants in Asia, the continent which is today the focus of the world, it's not Europe anymore, forget it. It's Asia. The giants have become slowly coming back to the status of being big players. But it's taken a long, long time. About 25 years, last 25 years only, it has come up. And, but it's not, but again we have this opportunity. And I think it's very important for us to seize it. And that's why I'm saying that we have the potential to be a superpower in about a decade, believe it or not. But for that potential, you have to have a correct matrix of policies. You have to have correct mindsets, correct attitudes, and there has to be an ecosystem that promotes the utilization of that opportunity, that promotes the empowerment of each and every one of us, because every one of our 1.4 billion people are special. You take somebody from any part of India, I can tell you, give him some kind of an education, or her some kind of an education, and I want to end this by just one more final minute. there was a friend of mine who basically, TNV Iyer, who started funding laptops in schools for tribal students in some very underprivileged parts of Maharashtra. He found, after he came back 6 months later, that all these, they were now having international pen friends, they were having international conversations. They had completely changed. In about 2 years' time, they became as fluent, let's say, in accessing that internet space as anybody else. So it doesn't take long. That special quality is there in every one of us. The question is to make use of it. I would like to see the government hand out 100, 150 million laptops. Someday, hopefully, an Indian manufacturer will produce cheap laptops. I'm sure that such people exist in India even today. But if they get through the system, they can do it. And the whole point is to make our country capable of doing it. I am happy. A lot of these stupid laws have been ended. I am happy that a lot of these regulations have been ended. I'm not happy that it's not happened enough. I'm not happy that it's not happening with the greater speed. But at least we're on the right track. But having said that, I'd like to say, if we miss this opportunity, the next opportunity will again come 75 years from now. And by that time, it may be too late because we are a very young population. And we are a young population that's growing pretty fast. And this young population has got access to, to knowledge of certain way of life that the young population of that period did not have. And they are going to be very unhappy if they are denied access to at least a small part of that life. So it's going to be a very, quote unquote, interesting situation to be in unless we grab this opportunity. Having said that, I know I've been exceeded my time. Dr. Shetty, I apologize, but I just thought I'll give you this very simple idea, and an idea which frankly, our Chancellor has incentivized, that all of us are special. The point is to ensure an ambience, an ecosystem, which that special quality is empowered, is made prakat, is empowered. Thank you.
So, good morning, sir. I'm Sanjay from third semester MBA. So my question is that how important is alliance in terms of geopolitics to estimate the global potential of India? If it is important, is Russia is an opportunity or a threat for India?
As far as Russia is concerned, we should buy as much oil as we can get from Russia. And we are doing that now. As far as weapons are concerned, no. Even the S-400, if you look at my writing, I was not very happy about it because some of the chips that are, the items could be Chinese manufacture, and that is a security threat. But I think as far as Russia is concerned, Russia is half of Europe, half of Asia. The Europeans have basically done great damage to themselves by going after Russia. The Americans, you can understand why they want to go after Russia. It's very logical. Russia is the only country in Europe, half of Europe, that can displace American primacy in Europe. India is the only country in Asia that can displace Chinese primacy in Asia. Russia will always be a target of the United States. India will always be a target of China. But having said that, cutting themselves off from Russian resources was, in my view, a harakiri. It has benefited America geopolitically to some extent, including in terms of marketing its sale. But frankly, it's been harmful. As far as we are concerned, we should not depend on Russia for our defense needs at all. And I'm delighted that finally you are having India, these big Lockheed, Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, some European companies, they are beginning to understand, unless they set up platforms in India, and not just component assembly platforms, but actual manufacturing platforms and actual sharing of R&D, they are not going to be able to compete with China, the Sino-Russian combination in the future. So a lot of these technologies are coming here. I'm not really very worried whether the label is American or not, because I've gone to America, I found many labels are basically American, and I go into the research labs, I find 3/4 of people working there are Indian. including citizens of India. Same with Europe. Same with, with ASEAN. And I'd like to say very clearly, Russia is an opportunity and a threat. America is an opportunity and a threat. It's a threat in that it wanted us to join its crusade on Ukraine. That's a European crusade. It's to do with the old Cold War. Poor Biden still remembers Cold War 1.0 with Russia. He hasn't got the memo that is now a new Cold War. So that's a threat for us if we were to jump in it, which we didn't jump in it. So everything is an opportunity and a threat. The point is to make use of the opportunity and diffuse the threat. And I'd just like to say one more thing. We're talking of South Asia. It's not just South Asia. I've always wondered why we're so hung up about South Asia. Southern Asia. Southern Asia I define as right from the Middle East up to up to ASEAN, including Vietnam. All that is Southern Asia. That is our backyard. South Asia is not our backyard. Southern Asia is our backyard. That includes Iran. That includes the GCC countries. That includes all those countries there. That includes ASEAN. This is our backyard. So let's understand our real backyard. And that is the opportunity. The Chinese have been trying, first the Americans, then the Chinese, make us obsess about South Asia and not spread beyond that. The reality is our South Asia, our natural South Asia, is the whole of Southern Asia.
Good morning, sir. Myself, Maurya GR from second year MBA. So, sir, you mentioned about minimum governance and minimum government and maximum governance, and also public-private partnership in terms of defense. So, my question is that, sir, in USA, private security agencies are there, which sometimes have become a threat to the country itself. So, in India, so don't you think that might also happen by focusing more on public-private partnership and become an internal threat?
I'd like to say that if you subvert some wings of the government, that's a huge threat, I can tell you. So threats can come from either government or... I don't recognize a boundary between government and civil society. I'd like our society to become more like some other societies, where you have a revolving door between private and public. You have, for example, in our embassies abroad. We have brilliant foreign service officers. Why can't we get some entrepreneurs who have shown their mettle, shown their patriotism, and put them as the heads of the commercial sections in embassies abroad? I mean, I can at least think of one entrepreneur who's in this particular audience, who could basically do a tremendous amount of good for the entire country, where that transfer to be made. But no, the point about India is that we have this colonial system. Unless you pass at a very young age your IFS or IPS or IAS examination, you're not fit to be in administration. And then what happens is, everywhere you're there. So today an officer is an expert on food. Tomorrow he's an expert on agriculture. Tomorrow he's on oceanography. The day after in defense. The day after that in internal security. It doesn't work that way, I'm afraid. So frankly, the most important antidote to a threat is public information and public awareness. Today, with the invention of the smartphone, I can assure you that if you are a threat to me, I'll take your image on the smartphone, I'll get your words, I'll get you in trouble. It's very difficult to censor that. With the result that today, the transparency that's happening, and one of the good things about future processing, which actually has been introduced by Narendra Modi, is that eventually he tried, I know in 2014, he tried very hard to ensure that every file gets tracked online. and that the progress of every file gets tracked online. Which officer, at what level is held up. Unfortunately, in implementation, there has been a certain amount of resistance. It's not yet come into. But that is at the back of his mind. I hope it comes into being. Transparency, I can tell you, is the antidote. And as for the threat, it can come from anywhere. And if I may say so, let's have the kind of mentality that is a healthy mentality. Don't be afraid of a first strike. If you're strong enough to develop a killer second strike, let's be strong enough to develop a killer second strike. So whoever gives us the first strike, that individual is going to regret it for the rest of his or her life. But let's not be afraid of walking around and in fear, somebody will come after me, somebody else will come after me, some threat will come after me. That's the wrong way of looking at it. Forget it. Let a threat come after. You develop yourself that any threat that comes, you can face it and destroy and demolish the individual who's making that, who's doing that threat to you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, you may please take your seat off stage.
I'm sorry?
You may please take your seat
Thank
off
you so
stage,
much.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you, lady.
Now, I would request the Chancellor, sir, to address the gathering.
In fact, I told I will be sitting here only for a few minutes and leave. After hearing Dr. Nalapat, the points he took made me to sit here. Even if we continued another 1 hour, 2 hours, I could have sat here. The topic you picked up, even the speaker you picked up is excellent. I can say I have to congratulate Dean and other team who, picked up this point topic and also requested Dr. Nalpad be with us. I have to tell this. The students who are sitting here, very fortunate. If I am not wrong, every distinguished lecture series giving you lot of opportunities for you to learn and also explore, and this you can use in your future career. I don't know how much you are understanding. Whether you are understanding or not, whenever I sit here, I am learning a lot. Because already I am a citizen, otherwise, if I am youngster, I could have used this in many places, in many occasions, because I had to tell this. Whether I have gone through the PILs and all those things. One example I will take. I am almost 50 years of experience now as a businessman, now as an educationalist. One example I will tell you, 30 years back, one commissioner, I don't know whether I have shared with you or not, one commissioner, the BBMP commissioner, called me at 10 o'clock in the night. Shamaraju, you have to save one property which is in the heart of the city, which is going for 100 rupees rent per year. Just 100 rupees rent per year. You believe it or not, I did this overnight, covered that place, fenced that place, and we protected, and it came to our security control. That was the confidence that commissioner had, and I fulfilled his orders. We saved that property. After 7-8 years or so, BBMP came forward. They want that also is a history in the public-private partnership. 1993, when I was still doing contracts, final contract, BBMP could not able to clear my bills. I myself went to HUDCO and got the sanction, loan sanction on behalf of the BBMP. Finally, to release the amount, loan amount, they could not able to produce their balance sheet. That was the situation 30 years back in this present BBMP. Those days it was a Bangalore City Corporation. You believe it or not, I have prepared in my office, site office, the balance sheet of the BBMP, taking all the details, what is their revenue, what is their expenditure. I was shocked to see how much amount they are spending on a lot of things which are not at all useful. Finally, when those days we used to have site meetings, including the urban development minister, commissioner, mayor, chief engineer, everybody will be present. That was the clout I had because they knew what I am. On that day I presented, this is the revenue you are getting. This is the expenditure you have. The rent what you are getting in the properties you developed. And the expenditure, the revenue you are getting, expenditure on that, what is that? And the 1/4 or 1/5 of the properties, the rent, what private people are getting, is more than what you are getting on the properties you invested and leased out. I told you earlier also, this is the first joint development between private and public, and on that lot of PLs came. Even today I am facing that problem. 100 rupees was should have been the income if allowed that. I got them 26 crores amount, and that was to be used only for the infrastructure, that is flyovers and subways like that. They didn't use, that is a different matter. But for you, the opportunity now through this distinguished lecture series is a golden opportunity. Particularly this topic, that is actualizing the global potential in India. This applies to everybody sitting here. You have all facilities, support, freedom, and how you will use your potential is very important. And coming to the, what is that, liberalizing, that is minimum government, more governance. Sir, I had to tell this. You are right. It is happening from last 25 years. Now from last, yes, maybe 5-6 years it is, we can see. But still more to do. I can say as a businessman and as an educationist what is happening. Being you are from, what is that, media, this thing you will be knowing better than me. But still what I am feeling, I am telling you, or experiencing, still they will take out 2 things. Again, they are again introducing some new thing, or at least one. So it is not balancing. We hope better future, and these things, more governance should happen, and more private and public partnership to happen. Even earlier people used to take, even I have spoken this even with the chief ministers, and when I had the opportunity. Government job is creating opportunities, creating infrastructure, that is. But not necessary they have to waste their time in what is that, building their private, what are all required other than their duty. And you rightly said, this bureaucracy should go. And personally I am thinking, what I am thinking, if I could able to really implement that, I can say I can do wonders in within the campus itself. Even all my children who are pursuing studies will be role models. But the system is not at all permitting. Otherwise, by good this time it is almost 20 years I have completed in the education field. This whole university could have been a role model, but still, I am trying my best. My team is supporting, and I hope at least 10% of my kids who are studying here will be following me, and that is what I am expecting from these children who are studying here. Once they become alumni, also they should follow this. I always say this is your university, and you have to take it forward. And at least if you could be able to practice and take this my ambitions and dream, what I am expecting from what is that do and what is that implement in REVA University. Thank you very much, sir, for your. I have learned a lot, and children, you have to really. This is how. That is. I think you might have heard. Practical experience, project-based learning, hands-on experience are very, very, very important. That is what I always insist, even in engineering courses, particularly for in management course. You are really, fortunate enough to have. And I have to congratulate Dr. Shubha here and her team. At least you people started doing this more. Sessions like should happen, not just having just classroom teaching. Once again, thank you very much. I am proud of you. Continue like this. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank our Honorable Chancellor for supporting and facilitating such informative, distinguished lecture series. It gives me immense pleasure to thank today's speaker, Professor Madhav Nalapat, for finding some time between his hectic schedule and sharing a lot of valuable insights. Thank you, sir. Last but not the least, I would wholeheartedly thank all the faculty members and students for your cooperation and active participation throughout the session. Thank you all.